I had been at McMurdo Station for 3 months when Dr. Emily Carter arrived. The days had settled into a rhythm by then. The endless Antarctic winter had a way of making time both drag and blur. I was checking weather reports in the communications building when the transport helicopter touched down, its rotors whipping snow into frenzied clouds. Emily stepped out with that look most newcomers had, a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Her face was pale against her dark blue parka. She carried 2 large equipment bags that pulled her shoulders down, but she refused help from the pilot who gestured toward them. Even from a distance, I could tell she was going to be the stubborn type. What caught my attention wasn't Emily herself, but David Morley's reaction to her arrival. As head of research, David rarely greeted new staff personally. That was usually left to the orientation team. But there he was, walking across the landing pad with purpose, his back straight as a ruler. I moved closer to the window. David shook Emily's hand and immediately took one of her bags. They exchanged a few words before he gestured toward the main building. This wasn't the standard welcome procedure. New arrivals always went through orientation first, safety briefings, station layout, emergency protocols, the works. But David led Emily directly to the administration wing, to his office. "What's so special about you, Dr. Carter?" I muttered, my breath fogging the glass. I tried to focus on my work, but curiosity kept pulling my attention back to the clock. 5 minutes, 10, 15. At the 20-minute mark, I saw Emily emerge from the hallway leading to David's office. She looked different, more serious than tired now. In her hand was a folded piece of paper that seemed to command her complete attention. She read it while walking, nearly bumping into a support column. I stepped into the corridor, raising my hand in greeting. "Welcome to the ICE, Robert Mitchell, Communications Specialist." Emily glanced up, her eyes taking a moment to focus on me. She folded the paper quickly, tucking it into her pocket. "Dr. Emily Carter, thanks." That was it. She walked past me without slowing down, her attention already elsewhere. I watched her disappear around the corner, heading toward the residential wing. Lunch in the cafeteria was its usual affair. Slightly overcooked pasta and conversations about equipment malfunctions and data anomalies. I looked for Emily, spotting her alone at a corner table. She wasn't eating much, just pushing food around while glancing at that paper again, now partially hidden under her tray. When she noticed me looking, she folded it quickly and slipped it back into her pocket. Later that afternoon, I got a message that Dr. Carter needed help moving equipment to her lab. Since I had finished my communication checks for the day, I volunteered. Her lab was in the West Wing, one of the smaller spaces, but with good insulation. When I arrived, Emily was already there, unpacking what looked like specialized sensing equipment. "Need a hand with those?" I asked, pointing to the heavy cases stacked by the door. She nodded without looking up. "The spectroscopy equipment goes against that wall. Be careful with the calibration unit. It's sensitive to shock." I moved the cases one by one, trying to break through her focus with casual conversation. "You picked an interesting time to arrive. Winter's in full swing. Won't see the sun for another month and a half." She responded, not really listening. "Food's not great, but Thursday nights they serve something that almost resembles ice cream." She continued unpacking, her movements precise and methodical. "The thermal regulation in these labs can be finicky. If it gets too cold overnight, check the auxiliary heater under the workbench." This at least got a nod of acknowledgement. Her hand kept drifting to her pocket, checking that the paper was still there. Every few minutes, she'd glance at the door as if expecting someone to walk in. I set down a case of what looked like sample containers. "So, what's your research focus?" "Ice core analysis." Her answers were clipped, minimal. "Looking for climate data or something more exotic?" "Something like that." She unwrapped a piece of equipment that looked like a miniature mass spectrometer, handling it with extreme care. I tried a different approach. "This your first time in Antarctica?" "Yes." She finally looked at me directly. "Is it always this cold inside the station?" "You get used to it. Layers are your friend. Most of us wear thermal underwear even indoors." She nodded, then went back to her unpacking. Her pocket seemed to draw her attention again, her hand checking the paper. My curiosity got the better of me. "Must be some important guidelines David gave you." Emily froze for a split second, then continued arranging her equipment with slightly less steady hands. "Just station protocols, nothing special." The way she said it, too casual, too dismissive, only intensified my interest. Funny, I don't remember getting any special papers when I arrived, just the standard orientation packet. She didn't respond. Is it about your research? Security clearance stuff? Emily straightened up, finally giving me her full attention. Her expression was carefully neutral. Just some station guidelines. David asked me to keep them to myself. Her tone made it clear the conversation was over. Thanks for your help with the equipment. The dismissal was obvious. I nodded and headed toward the door, but couldn't resist one more question. All settled in your quarters? Yes, thank you. Her attention was already back on her equipment, but I noticed her hand slip into her pocket again, fingers curling around what I now couldn't help but think of as a secret. I left her lab, my mind filled with questions. In 3 months at McMurdo, I'd never seen David give anyone special instructions, let alone personally escort a new arrival. Every researcher followed the same protocols, used the same orientation materials. What made Dr. Emily Carter different? And what was on that paper she guarded so carefully? I woke up the next morning with questions about Dr. Emily Carter still turning in my mind. The station was quiet as I made my way to the cafeteria, the constant hum of generators providing the only soundtrack to the perpetual Antarctic darkness outside. Breakfast at McMurdo wasn't exactly a culinary adventure. The kitchen staff did their best with what they had, but after 3 months, the powdered eggs and rehydrated hash browns had lost whatever appeal they might have once had. I filled my tray anyway and scanned the room. Emily was sitting alone in the same corner table she'd claimed yesterday, hunched over her food. She wasn't eating much, just pushing scrambled eggs around her plate with a fork while her other hand held that same folded paper from yesterday. She was reading it again, her brow furrowed in concentration. I walked over, coffee mug in hand. Mind if I join you? She looked up, startled, and quickly folded the paper again. Oh, good morning. I sat down across from her without waiting for a proper invitation. Sleep okay? First night in a new place can be rough. Fine, she said, tucking the paper halfway into her pocket. Not all the way in this time, like she might need to reference it again soon. The heating pipes make weird noises at night, I said, taking a bite of toast. Took me a week to get used to it. Emily nodded absently, her attention clearly elsewhere. Her eyes kept darting to the paper in her pocket. So, I said, deciding to be direct. What's with the secret instructions? Her head snapped up. What? The paper. The one David gave you yesterday that you keep reading and hiding. I've been here 3 months and never got anything like that. Emily glanced around the cafeteria, checking if anyone was listening. The room was mostly empty, just a few researchers at tables far from ours, all absorbed in their own conversations or tablet screens. It's nothing, she said, but her tone wasn't convincing. Just some guidelines for my research. I leaned forward. Come on, I saw how David personally escorted you in. Nobody gets the VIP treatment around here. She stared at me for a long moment, seeming to debate something internally. Then she sighed. He told me not to show anyone. Well, that's not suspicious at all, I said with a small laugh. Makes me think it's either really important or completely ridiculous. Emily didn't smile. He was very clear about keeping it confidential. Look, we're going to be working together all winter. If there are special protocols I should know about— They're not research protocols, she interrupted, then lowered her voice. They're safety rules for the station. I raised an eyebrow. Beyond the standard orientation packet? What kind of safety rules? Emily looked down at her untouched breakfast, then back at me. You really didn't get anything like this when you arrived? I shook my head. Standard orientation, fire exits, emergency procedures. Don't go outside without proper gear. The usual stuff. She hesitated again, then slowly pulled the paper from her pocket. Maybe you should see for yourself. Emily unfolded the paper and slid it across the table, glancing nervously toward the cafeteria entrance as she did. I picked it up, half expecting to see classified research parameters or something similarly serious. Instead, I found a typed list of 6 rules, all of which seemed bizarre. Station Safety Protocol, Personnel Addendum 1. Do not acknowledge or approach any figure you see outside the station windows between sunset and sunrise, even if they appear to be station personnel. 2. If you hear knocking on your bedroom door between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., do not open it regardless of what voice you hear on the other side. 3. Do not go outside the station between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. under any circumstances. 4. If you hear footsteps in the hallway after midnight, lock your door immediately and remain inside until morning. 5. If you hear a voice calling your name that sounds like someone you know, do not respond to it unless you can physically see the person speaking. 6. If radio equipment produces unexpected static or voices you cannot identify, turn it off immediately and report the incident to the station head. I read through the list twice, my initial confusion turning to amusement. I looked up at Emily, who was watching me intently. "You're kidding, right?" I said, unable to keep the laughter from my voice. "This is what David gave you?" Emily didn't smile. He was completely serious. "This has to be some kind of joke, a hazing ritual for newcomers." I scanned the list again. Don't acknowledge figures outside the window. Don't open doors if someone knocks. This is ridiculous. "That's what I thought at first," Emily said quietly. "But you should have seen his face when he gave it to me. He wasn't joking." I handed the paper back to her. "Trust me, this is just the old-timers having fun with the new arrivals. Someone probably did it to David when he first got here, and now he's keeping the tradition alive." "He showed me how to use the extra deadbolts on the station doors," Emily insisted. "He demonstrated twice to make sure I understood." "Extra deadbolts? The doors just have the standard locks and the emergency bars." "Not all of them," she said. "He showed me hidden mechanisms on the main exits, said they were installed for additional security during winter months." I shook my head. "I've been through every door in this station. There aren't any hidden locks." Emily folded the paper carefully and returned it to her pocket. "He also told me not to discuss the rules with anyone who didn't already know about them." "Well, now I know about them," I said with a grin. "And I still think it's a prank. Antarctica does strange things to people. Isolation, darkness, cold. It makes some of the long-timers develop weird senses of humor." "Maybe," Emily said, but she didn't sound convinced. She picked up her fork and resumed pushing eggs around her plate. "Look, I've been here 3 months. No mysterious figures outside windows, no midnight knocking, no strange voices. Just researchers doing their work in one of the most hostile environments on Earth." Emily finally looked up at me, her expression serious. "And the radio static? Rule 6? Radio equipment malfunctions all the time out here. The weather plays havoc with signals." She nodded slowly, seeming to consider this. "I hope you're right." "I am," I said confidently. "Finish your breakfast. The eggs are bad enough when they're warm." The rest of the day passed normally. I went about my regular duties in the communications room, monitoring weather reports and coordinating with the few field teams still operating during winter. Emily disappeared into her lab, and I didn't see her again until dinner, where she sat with a group of other researchers instead of alone. She seemed to be making an effort to appear normal, though I noticed she kept checking her watch whenever the conversation lulled. After dinner, I returned to the communications room for a late shift. Most of the station would be winding down for the night, but someone always needed to monitor the emergency channels and weather alerts. The night shift was usually quiet, a good time to catch up on reports or read. I had been working for about an hour when the equipment started acting up. The main radio console emitted a burst of static that made me jump. I adjusted the frequency, thinking it might be interference from a storm, but the static continued, growing louder. I checked the weather monitors, nothing unusual showing on the radar. The static changed, becoming rhythmic, almost like breathing. Then, underneath it, I heard what sounded like whispers, not English, not any language I recognized. The voices were low, distant, multiple speakers overlapping in hushed tones. A chill ran up my back as I remembered Rule 6 from Emily's list. If radio equipment produces unexpected static or voices you cannot identify, turn it off immediately. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, adjusting the dials again. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, though still incomprehensible. There was an urgency to them now, like they were trying to communicate something important. I ran a quick diagnostic on the system. Everything showed normal functioning. No equipment failures, no power fluctuations. The whispers suddenly coalesced into a single voice. still speaking in that strange language, but now clear enough that I could make out individual words, though I couldn't understand them. The voice paused, as if waiting for a response. Rule 6 echoed in my mind again. Just interference, I told myself firmly, but my hand moved toward the power switch anyway. I flipped it off. The radio went silent. The sudden absence of sound was startling. The communications room, usually filled with the background hum of equipment, felt unnaturally quiet. I could hear my own breathing, too loud in the stillness. I waited a minute, then turned the radio back on. Normal static. Normal transmissions from the few research outposts still operating during winter. Nothing unusual. Coincidence, I said aloud, but my voice sounded uncertain even to my own ears. I completed my shift without further incidents, but found myself jumpy, startling at small noises from the heating system or the building settling. By the time my replacement arrived, I was ready to leave, the memory of those whispered voices still lingering in my mind. As I walked back to my quarters, I remembered how I'd laughed at Emily's rules just that morning. The laughter didn't come so easily now. After the strange incident with the radio, I slept poorly. The whispered voices from the static lingered in my mind, making me question my own skepticism about Emily's rules. But morning brought clarity. Radio interference was common in Antarctica. The isolation and extreme conditions played tricks on the mind. There had to be a rational explanation. I spotted Emily in the cafeteria during lunch. She sat alone again, her food mostly untouched. Dark circles had formed under her eyes, and she kept glancing around the room with quick, nervous movements. When she saw me, she seemed to relax slightly, as if relieved to see a familiar face. I grabbed my tray and joined her. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She flinched at my choice of words. "Not a ghost, but something happened last night." "What do you mean?" I asked, cutting into what the kitchen staff optimistically called meatloaf. Emily leaned forward, lowering her voice, though no one sat close enough to hear. There were footsteps in the hallway outside my room, around midnight. Probably just someone getting a late snack. The kitchen's always open. She shook her head. "No. Remember Rule 4? Emily pulled the folded paper from her pocket and spread it on the table between us, her finger pointing to the 4th item on the list. I read it again. If you hear footsteps in the hallway after midnight, lock your door immediately and remain inside until morning." "So what did you do?" I asked, more curious than concerned. "I locked my door. The footsteps stopped right outside, then nothing. They just stayed there, not moving, for at least 10 minutes. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, seeking warmth. Then they walked away, slowly, the same pace as before. I took a bite of food, considering how to respond. After my experience with the radio last night, I couldn't dismiss her concerns as easily as I might have yesterday. But I still believed there was a logical explanation. "The heating system makes weird noises," I offered. "Pipes contracting in the cold. Sometimes it sounds like footsteps or knocking." Emily stared at me. "These were footsteps, Robert. Heavy ones, human ones." "Well, there are 46 people at this station during winter. Could have been anyone." "At exactly midnight, standing motionless outside my door?" I shrugged. Scientists keep odd hours. Maybe they were trying to decide if it was too late to knock. Emily folded the paper carefully and returned it to her pocket. "You don't believe me." I didn't say that. I paused, debating whether to tell her about the radio incident. "Look, I heard something strange on the communications equipment last night. Static, then whispers. It was unsettling." Her eyes widened. "What did you do?" "I turned it off like your Rule 6 says. When I turned it back on, everything was normal. See, the rules work." She pushed her tray away, food barely touched. "Something's not right here, Robert. David knows it. That's why he gave me these rules. Or it's just the Antarctic winter getting to all of us. The isolation, the darkness, it affects people, makes them paranoid." Emily stood up. "I need to get back to my lab. I have samples to process." I watched her leave, noticing how she walked with her shoulders hunched, as if expecting something to grab her from behind. The rest of the day passed without incident. I finished my shift in communications and headed to dinner early. Emily wasn't there. I found her in her lab instead, hunched over equipment, her movements precise but tense. "There's a movie night in the rec room," I said from the doorway. "Some sci-fi thing from last year. Might take your mind off things." She didn't look up. "No thanks." I want to finish this and get back to my room early. The movie won't run late. Most people here are morning types. I said no. Her voice was sharper than necessary. She finally looked at me, her expression softening slightly. Sorry, I want to be in my room before dark. It's Antarctica in winter. It's always dark. Before 10, she clarified, returning to her work. I want to be locked in before 10. I lingered in the doorway. You're taking these rules pretty seriously. You would too if you heard those footsteps. She adjusted something on her equipment with trembling hands. Or those voices on your radio. She had a point. The memory of those whispers still made my skin crawl. But one strange occurrence didn't mean there was something supernatural happening at McMurdo. Suit yourself, I said. Offer stands if you change your mind. The movie was forgettable. Something about aliens that looked suspiciously human, except for some latex prosthetics on their foreheads. I spent more time watching my fellow researchers than the screen. None of them seemed concerned about mysterious rules or figures outside windows. They laughed at the right moments, threw popcorn at the screen during particularly bad dialogue, and generally behaved like normal people stuck in an isolated research station. When the movie finished around 10, most people drifted back to their quarters or labs. I lingered, chatting with the technician who had set up the projector. Our conversation eventually turned to the strange noises the station made at night. The first winter I spent here, I was convinced someone was walking around outside my room every night, he said, coiling cables. Turned out to be the ventilation system. That's what I told Emily, I said, but she's convinced it's something else. The new researcher? Give her time. Everyone gets jumpy their first winter. He finished packing up the equipment. Night, Rob. After he left, I found myself thinking about Emily, alone in her room, probably staring at the door, waiting for footsteps. Her fear had seemed so genuine. What if there really had been someone outside her door last night? I made a decision, half concerned and half curious. I'd walk past her room, make my footsteps clearly audible, and see how she reacted. If nothing else, it might prove to her that the sounds she'd heard were just normal station activity. It was about 10:30 when I reached the residential wing where Emily's quarters were located. The hallway was silent, the overhead lights dimmed to their night setting. I deliberately made my footsteps heavy as I approached her door, walking slowly. I heard it immediately, the distinctive click of a deadbolt engaging. My footsteps had triggered exactly the response the rule prescribed. Emily had locked her door the moment she heard someone in the hallway. I paused outside her room, considering knocking to tell her it was just me, but decided against it. She'd probably refuse to open the door anyway, and it would only reinforce her paranoia. Better to let her believe her rules had kept her safe for another night. I returned to the common area and settled into one of the worn armchairs with a book. Most of the station had gone quiet by now, with just the omnipresent hum of generators and heating systems as background noise. I read for about an hour, occasionally glancing at the window where snow swirled in the darkness outside. I was just thinking about heading to bed when the door to the common area burst open. Emily stood there, her face white as the snow outside, her whole body trembling. She wore only a long-sleeve thermal shirt and pants, no coat, no outer layers, completely unprepared for the Antarctic environment. Emily, what's wrong? I stood up, alarmed by her appearance. She's out there, Emily said, her voice shaking. She's calling me. I moved toward her. Who's out there? Sarah, my sister. Emily grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in with surprising strength. She's outside the station. She's asking for help. I gently guided her to the chair I'd vacated. Your sister is in Colorado, Emily. You told me that yesterday. I know where she lives. Emily's voice rose. But it's her voice. It's Sarah. She's calling my name. I went to the window and looked out. Nothing but darkness and the constant swirl of snow, illuminated faintly by the station's exterior lights. No human figure, no sign of movement except the wind-driven precipitation. There's no one out there, Emily. It's 30 below zero with wind chill. No one could survive that without proper gear. Listen, she insisted, getting up and pulling me back to the window. Just listen. I humored her, staying silent and straining to hear anything besides the wind. For several long moments, there was nothing. Then, so faint I almost missed it, a voice carried on the wind. A woman's voice, calling what could have been Emily's name. That's just the wind, I said, but with less certainty than I'd intended. "It plays tricks out here." Emily shook her head violently. "No, it's Sarah. It's her voice, Robert. Exactly her voice. She's calling for help. She wants me to come outside." The voice came again, slightly louder this time. I couldn't make out words, just a human-like sound, almost lost in the howling wind. "Emily, your sister is in Colorado. There's no way she could be here." "I know that," she shouted, tears forming in her eyes. "Don't you think I know that? But it's her voice. It's exactly her voice." I looked out the window again. Still nothing visible in the darkness. "She's out there," Emily insisted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She needs help." I remembered Rule 5 from her list. If you hear a voice calling your name that sounds like someone you know, do not respond to it unless you can physically see the person speaking. "Emily, listen to me. The rules you showed me, remember Rule 5? About voices that sound like people you know?" She nodded slowly, hugging herself. "This is exactly what it's warning about. You can't see anyone out there, right? Just voices." "But it's Sarah," she repeated, though I could see doubt beginning to creep into her expression. Why would her voice be here? How could anything imitate her so perfectly? I had no good answer for that. My rational mind rejected the supernatural implications, but I couldn't explain how Emily could hear her sister's voice in the middle of Antarctica. "Let's get you back to your room," I said gently. "Whatever it is, the rules say not to respond to it, right? So that's what we'll do." Emily allowed me to guide her toward the door, but she kept looking back at the window. She sounded scared, Robert. She was begging me to help her. "I know, but there's no one out there who could survive in these conditions. Not without gear, not at this hour." I kept my arm around her shoulders as we walked down the hallway. "Whatever you heard, it wasn't really your sister." When we reached her door, Emily fumbled with her keycard, her hand still shaking. I took it from her and opened the door, then handed it back. "Lock this behind me," I said. "Try to get some sleep." Emily paused in the doorway. "What if she calls again?" "Don't answer. Don't go outside. Those are the rules, right?" She nodded slowly. "But what if it really is someone who needs help? In that case, we alert David and organize a proper search team with equipment and protocols. We don't just run outside in the middle of the night." Emily seemed to accept this logic. She entered her room and began to close the door, then stopped. "You heard it too, didn't you? The voice." I hesitated. I heard something carried on the wind. It could have been anything. It was Sarah's voice, exactly her voice. Emily's expression hardened with certainty. How could anything here know what my sister sounds like? I had no answer for her. "Get some rest, Emily. Things will seem clearer in the morning." She closed the door, and I waited until I heard the lock engage before walking away. As I headed back to my own quarters, I found myself glancing at the windows I passed, half expecting to see a figure looking in, but there was only darkness and snow. The rules seemed less ridiculous now. I'd heard strange whispers on the radio. Emily had heard footsteps at midnight and her sister's voice calling from the impossible cold. Neither of us could explain these experiences rationally. I reached my room and locked the door behind me, a precaution I'd never bothered with before. As I prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the image of Emily's face when she burst into the common room, the absolute conviction that she'd heard her sister calling to her from thousands of miles away. What bothered me most wasn't the possibility that something strange was happening at McMurdo Station. It was the growing suspicion that David Morley had known about it all along. I locked my door with uncharacteristic caution that night. My usual routine involved nothing more than kicking off my boots and falling into bed. But after what happened with Emily, I felt compelled to check that the deadbolt was secure. The metal mechanism slid into place with a satisfying click that eased my mind, if only slightly. My quarters were standard McMurdo issue, a narrow bed against one wall, a small desk with a lamp, and barely enough floor space to pace if the urge struck. The walls were thin enough that I could sometimes hear my neighbors turning pages in their books. Tonight, though, the station seemed unusually quiet. Even the constant background noise of the heating system seemed muted. I sat on the edge of my bed, replaying the events of the evening. Emily had heard her sister's voice outside. Impossible given that Sarah lived thousands of miles away in Colorado. There had to be a logical explanation. Sound carried strangely in extreme cold. The isolation and darkness played tricks on the mind. The station's machinery created audio illusions. All of these made more sense than whatever Emily's list of rules was trying to protect us from. I changed into a worn t-shirt and flannel pants, brushed my teeth in the tiny sink wedged into the corner of my room, and finally turned out the light. The darkness was complete. No streetlights filtered through my window. No moon illuminated the landscape. Just the red standby light on my desk clock and the green dot of the smoke detector overhead. Sleep came reluctantly. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind circling back to Emily's face when she burst into the common room. The absolute certainty in her eyes when she said she'd heard her sister calling. The fear, the confusion. I must have finally fallen into deeper sleep because the sound that woke me seemed to cut through layers of unconsciousness, dragging me upward into sudden heart-pounding alertness. Footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Slow, deliberate footsteps, heavy enough to be clearly audible through my door. The kind of measured pace that suggested purpose rather than someone simply walking to the bathroom or kitchen. I sat up, fumbling for the lamp switch. The dim yellow light did little to dispel the shadows in my room, but it was better than complete darkness. I checked my clock. 1:27 a.m. The footsteps continued, growing louder, closer. Each step seemed precisely timed, with exactly the same interval between them. My eyes fixed on the door as the sound approached. Then they stopped, right outside my room. I held my breath, straining to hear any movement, any indication of who might be standing there. For what felt like minutes, there was nothing but silence. I started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing, if the conversation with Emily had planted the suggestion in my mind. Then a voice called my name. Rob. My body went cold. I knew that voice, knew it as well as my own. Rob, you in there? It's me. It was Jake's voice, my younger brother's voice. Every inflection, every tonal quality, exactly as I remembered it, which was impossible. Jake had died 2 years ago in a car accident. Come on, Rob, I need your help. I'm freezing out here. I stood up, moving toward the door, almost involuntarily. My mind raced with contradictory thoughts. It couldn't be Jake, but it sounded exactly like him. Every detail of his voice was perfect. The slight rasp when he said my name, the way he always seemed to smile through his words. Rob, please. I don't know where I am. Everything's dark and cold. My hand reached for the doorknob. I could picture Jake standing there, confused and shivering, needing his big brother's help, just like when we were kids. Then I remembered Rule 5 from Emily's list. If you hear a voice calling your name that sounds like someone you know, do not respond to it unless you can physically see the person speaking. My hand froze inches from the doorknob. Rob, are you in there? I can hear you moving around. I took a step back from the door. Whatever was speaking wasn't Jake. Couldn't be Jake. My brother was buried in a cemetery in Michigan. I'd stood at his funeral, watched them lower his casket into the ground. I'm hurt, Rob. I need help. The voice cracked slightly on the word help, just like Jake's used to when he was trying not to cry. Why won't you open the door? I backed up until my legs hit the bed, then sat down heavily. My hands gripped the edge of the mattress as I forced myself to stay put. It wasn't Jake. It couldn't be Jake. Rob, please, I'm so cold. The voice was softer now, almost a whisper. Just open the door, just for a second. My chest tightened with a mixture of grief and fear. The grief was for my brother, the real Jake, who I'd lost and still missed every day. The fear was for whatever stood outside my door now, using his voice with such perfect accuracy that part of me still wanted to believe it was him. Fine. The voice turned hard, angry. Leave me out here. You always were selfish. That broke the spell. Jake had never spoken to me like that in life. He'd been the gentler of us two, quick to apologize after arguments, incapable of holding a grudge. The thing outside my door had gotten that detail wrong. You're not my brother, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Silence followed my words. Complete, absolute silence, as if even the station's ambient noises had been muted. Then the voice came again, no longer pretending to be Jake. It was lower, with a strange resonance that made the hair on my arms stand up. Open the door, Robert. I stood up and grabbed the only potential weapon in my room, a heavy metal flashlight I kept by the bed. Go away. Open the door. Each word seemed to vibrate through the air, through the door, through me. No, Another long silence followed. I stood motionless, flashlight raised, staring at the door and trying to control my breathing. Then the footsteps resumed, slow, deliberate, moving away down the hallway until I couldn't hear them anymore. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I dragged my desk chair to face the door and sat there with the flashlight in my lap, jumping at every creak and groan of the station settling. The list of rules no longer seemed absurd or paranoid. They seemed desperately, vitally important. When my alarm beeped at 6 a.m., I was still sitting in the chair, eyes red from sleeplessness, muscles stiff from hours of tension. I stood and stretched, feeling the ache in my back and shoulders. The fear of the night seemed less immediate in the harsh light of my room's overhead fluorescent, but the memory of Jake's voice remained vivid. I opened my door cautiously, half expecting to find someone, or something, still waiting outside. The hallway was empty. What caught my attention was the thin layer of snow on the floor near the maintenance exit at the end of the corridor. The wind must have blown it in through gaps in the weather stripping. I walked down the hallway, studying the snow. If someone had been standing outside my door during the night, they should have left footprints. But the dusting of white was undisturbed except for my own tracks being made as I approached. No one had been in this hallway last night. At least no one who left footprints. I returned to my room, showered quickly, and dressed for the day, though exhaustion made every movement require extra effort. By the time I reached the cafeteria for breakfast, most of the station's researchers were already there, clustered around tables with coffee mugs and trays of food. I scanned the room automatically, looking for Emily. After what happened last night, I needed to talk to her, to compare experiences, but she wasn't at her usual corner table. I grabbed coffee and a plate of eggs, then approached a group of researchers from the biology lab who usually ate around the same time as Emily. "Any of you seen Dr. Carter this morning?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Karen Chen, a marine biologist who'd been at McMurdo for 4 seasons, shook her head. "Not since yesterday evening. She was headed to the common room with a book, I think." "You check her lab?" asked Thomas, another researcher. "She seemed pretty intense about her work." "Not yet. Thought I'd try here first." I took a sip of coffee, the bitter heat helping to clear some of the fog from my sleepless night. "She's not in the breakfast line?" "Haven't seen her," Karen said. "But she probably just slept in. First few weeks in Antarctica can really mess with your schedule." I nodded and moved away from their table, not wanting to draw more attention to my concern. But as I sat down with my own breakfast, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Had she gone outside after all, after I left her at her door? I ate quickly, hardly tasting the food, then headed toward the lab wing. Emily's workspace was dark when I arrived, exactly as she'd left it the previous evening. Her equipment was neatly arranged, samples stored properly, notebook closed on the bench. Next, I checked her quarters. I knocked several times with no response, then tried the handle. Locked. I pressed my ear to the door but heard no movement inside. "Looking for Dr. Carter?" I turned to find David Morley standing a few feet away, his face unreadable. "Yes. Have you seen her this morning?" David's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "When did you last see her, Mitchell?" The formal use of my last name and the direct question put me on alert. "Last night, around 11. She was upset. Thought she heard something outside the station. Something or someone. She thought she heard her sister calling to her. From outside." I watched David's reaction carefully. I walked her back to her room, made sure she locked the door behind her. David's gaze was penetrating. "Did she tell you what she heard, specifically?" "Her sister's voice, calling for help." He nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something he already knew. "And you? Did you hear anything unusual last night, Mitchell?" I hesitated. Something in David's tone made me wary of sharing my experience, but I needed answers. Footsteps outside my door around 1:30, then a voice. Whose voice? David's question came quickly, sharply. "My brother's." I swallowed hard. "My brother who died 2 years ago." David closed his eyes briefly, his shoulders sagging slightly. "And did you open your door?" "No." Relief crossed his features. "Good. That's good." He straightened, becoming the authoritative head of research again. "I need you to come with me, Mitchell. There's something we need to discuss." As I followed David toward the administration wing, dread settled in my stomach like a lead weight. Emily was missing. I'd heard my dead brother's voice in the night, and David Morley didn't seem surprised by either of these facts. Something was very wrong at McMurdo Station, and I had a feeling I was about to find out just how wrong it was. I followed David down the corridor toward the administration wing, my thoughts racing. The fluorescent lights overhead made his face look harsh and angular as he walked a few steps ahead of me, his posture rigid. "She's gone, isn't she?" I asked, hurrying to keep pace with him. David didn't answer immediately. He pushed through a set of double doors that led to the security office, a room I'd only seen a couple times during my initial orientation. Inside, 2 monitors showed feeds from the limited camera system McMurdo had installed last season. A 3rd screen displayed keycard access logs. "Yes," he finally said, pointing to the monitor with the logs. "Emily Carter left the station at 11:47 last night." I stared at the entry on the screen. E. Carter, exit, door 3, 2347. "Maybe she came back through a different door," I suggested, scrolling through the subsequent entries. "She didn't," David said flatly. "I've checked every entry point. No record of her return." A cold weight settled in my stomach. I need to find her. I rushed out of the security office without waiting for David's response. My first stop was Emily's quarters again. I pounded on the door harder this time, hoping I'd somehow missed her earlier. When no answer came, I found the station manager and convinced him to unlock her room. The door swung open to reveal an empty space. The bed was made, untouched since yesterday. Her laptop sat closed on the small desk. A half-empty water bottle stood on the nightstand next to a dog-eared paperback. Everything looked normal except for one detail. The heavy winter parka that should have been hanging on the hooks by the door was missing. So were her insulated boots. "She went outside," I said, my voice hollow. The station manager nodded grimly. "Looks that way." I returned to the security office where David was reviewing more footage. "Her coat and boots are gone," I told him. "She must have gone to look for her sister." David's expression didn't change. She wasn't looking for her sister. She was looking for whatever was using her sister's voice. "We need to organize a search party," I insisted. "Already happening," David replied, turning away from the monitors. "I activated emergency protocols as soon as I confirmed she was missing. Team is gearing up now." 20 minutes later, I stood by the main exit with 4 other staff members, all of us bundled in our extreme weather gear. The temperature outside read -38 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chill pushing it even lower. In these conditions, exposed skin would freeze in less than 5 minutes. "We stay together," said Karen Chen, who'd apparently been trained for search and rescue operations. "Move in a standard grid pattern from the exit point. Communication check every 5 minutes." We stepped outside into the biting cold and howling wind. The perpetual darkness of Antarctic winter surrounded us, broken only by our headlamps and the station's exterior lights. The snow blew sideways, limiting visibility to about 15 yards. "Look for footprints," Karen shouted over the wind. We found them almost immediately, a single set of tracks leading away from door 3. The pattern matched standard-issue station boots. Emily's trail headed straight out from the building toward the darkness beyond the perimeter lights. "She was moving with purpose," I said, crouching to examine the depth of the prints, not wandering or disoriented. We followed her tracks for about 50 yards. The footprints showed no hesitation, no change in stride length or direction. Then, without warning, they stopped completely. "What the hell?" Karen's voice cut through the wind as her headlamp illuminated the last footprint. I knelt down to examine it. The final print was normal, a complete boot impression in the snow, but beyond it was nothing. No sign of Emily continuing forward, turning around, or moving in any direction. "Is there ice under here? Could she have slipped?" I asked, brushing away snow to check the surface. "No," Karen replied, "and look at the snow pattern. No disturbance, no signs of a fall or struggle. It's like she just..." One of the other searchers began. "Vanished," I finished. We expanded our search, moving in concentric circles from the last footprint. No trail, no indication of what had happened to Emily. After 2 hours, with the cold becoming dangerous even through our gear, David's voice crackled over the radio. "Return to base. Conditions worsening. Forecast shows increasing winds." "We can't just leave her out here," I argued into my radio. "Mitchell, temperatures are dropping. Winds picking up. You found nothing in 2 hours. Return now." Karen put her hand on my shoulder. "He's right. We can't help her if we become casualties too." Reluctantly, I followed the team back to the station. As we trudged toward the lights, I looked back one last time at the vast darkness where Emily's tracks had vanished. Something was out there, something that could mimic voices perfectly, that could lure people out into deadly conditions, that could make them disappear without a trace. Back inside, after shedding our gear and warming up, David summoned me to his office. Unlike the security room, this space was almost cozy. Bookshelves lined the walls and a small electric heater hummed in the corner. David sat behind his desk, hands folded, watching me as I took the seat opposite him. "She showed you the rules, didn't she?" he asked without preamble. I considered lying but saw no point. "Yes, yesterday at breakfast." David let out a long breath and rubbed his temples. "I specifically told her not to share them with anyone who didn't already know." "Why the secrecy? If there's something dangerous here, shouldn't everyone know? You tell 46 scientists that something supernatural is hunting them. What happens?" David asked. "Half dismiss it as nonsense, the other half want to study it. Neither response keeps people safe. So instead, you give cryptic rules to some people and leave others in the dark. We tell people when they need to know." David leaned back in his chair. "When they demonstrate sensitivity." "Sensitivity to what?" "To whatever is out there." He gestured vaguely toward the window, where snow still blew against the glass. "Some people never experience anything unusual here. Others, like you and Emily, attract attention almost immediately." I thought about the radio voices, about hearing Jake call my name. "Is that why she got the rules right away? She was sensitive?" David nodded. "We've learned to spot the signs. When she arrived, I saw something in her that made me think she'd be vulnerable. I tried to protect her with the rules." "Fat lot of good they did," I said bitterly. "The rules work," David snapped, his voice suddenly hard. "They've kept dozens of researchers alive over the years. Emily chose to break them. She went outside after hours, responding to a voice she knew couldn't possibly be her sister's." "Wait, years? How long has this been happening?" David's expression softened slightly. "Longer than my time here. The first documented incident was in 1997. Researcher went missing during winter. Tracks ended suddenly, just like Emily's." "And what is it? What's out there?" If I had that answer, we'd have solved this problem instead of managing it. David opened his desk drawer and pulled out a piece of paper. "What I can tell you is that Emily's disappearance isn't the first, and if people keep breaking the rules, it won't be the last." He slid the paper across the desk to me. I recognized it immediately, the same list of 6 rules Emily had shown me, but this version had additional text at the bottom, written in red ink. "Updated rules," David explained. "Read them." I picked up the paper, noticing that my hands were shaking slightly. The original 6 rules were identical to what Emily had shown me. Below them, 3 new items appeared in stark red. 7. Never discuss what you've witnessed with anyone outside the station. 8. Report any rule violations immediately. 9. Under no circumstances attempt to investigate disappearances. I looked up at David. "How many people have disappeared?" "Since I've been station head, 3, including Emily." "And before that?" "Records indicate 11 cases with similar patterns since 1997. I tried to process this. 14 people had vanished from McMurdo Station over the years, their disappearances apparently covered up or explained away. Why isn't this public knowledge? Why hasn't the station been shut down?" "Because whatever is happening here is contained here," David replied. "Close the station, and what happens when researchers return in a year or 2? The same thing starts all over, but with no institutional knowledge, no rules to keep people safe." "So instead you just accept occasional casualties?" David's face hardened. "I don't accept anything. I do everything in my power to protect my staff, which now includes you, Mitchell. Those rules are your lifeline. Follow them without exception." I stared at the paper in my hand. "And if I don't want to stay? If I want emergency extraction?" "Not possible during winter. You know that. No flights until October at the earliest." He was right. We were all trapped here until spring brought the first supply planes. 7 more months in this frozen prison with whatever lurked outside. "What about the others?" I asked. "The rest of the station?" "Long-term staff know what they need to know. They follow protocols without requiring explanations. New arrivals learn when necessary." David picked up a pen, rolling it between his fingers. Emily's mistake was thinking she could help whatever was calling to her, that it actually was her sister somehow, or that if it wasn't, she could still do something for it. What is it then, if it's not who it sounds like? David set the pen down carefully. I don't know what it is. I only know what it isn't. It isn't your brother. It wasn't Emily's sister. The voices, the figures people sometimes see, they're not what they appear to be. Then what do they want? To get inside. David's voice was flat, matter of fact. Or to get you outside. Either way, the outcome is the same. I glanced down at the rules again. And these work? They keep it away? They've kept me alive for 6 winters. David leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. Follow them without question, Mitchell. It's your only chance of making it to October. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket, the weight of it somehow heavier than its physical presence should allow. David was telling me to accept Emily's disappearance, to not investigate, to simply move on and focus on surviving. What do we tell the others about Emily? I asked. That she violated safety protocols by going outside alone during a storm, that conditions made extended search impossible, that we'll file full reports when communications allow. The clinical detachment in his voice made my stomach turn, but I nodded anyway. What choice did I have? I left David's office with the updated rules in my pocket. As I walked back through the main corridor, I passed the common room where Emily had first heard her sister's voice. Without thinking, I glanced out the window. Outside, barely visible through the blowing snow, a figure stood motionless near the perimeter. Even at this distance, even through the storm, I recognized the dark blue parka. The figure raised an arm, waving slowly at me through the glass. It looked exactly like Emily. I quickly turned away, remembering rule number 1, do not acknowledge figures seen outside windows between sunset and sunrise. I kept walking, my pace increasing until I was nearly running to my quarters. Once inside, I locked the door, then pulled out the rules and read them again, committing each one to memory. I planned to follow them to the letter. I had to survive until October. 7 more months in this frozen hell. Whatever was outside, whatever had taken Emily, it wouldn't get me too. I stared at the list in my hand, the 3 new rules in red ink standing out against the original 6. The rules felt both absurd and deadly serious at the same time, like a child's game with real consequences. I looked up at David, who watched me with the steady gaze of someone who had seen too much. How did it start? I asked, folding the paper and slipping it into my pocket. You said the first documented case was in 1997, but what caused it? David leaned back in his chair. The light from his desk lamp cast shadows across his face, making the lines around his eyes more visible. He looked tired, not just from the search for Emily, but from carrying whatever knowledge he'd accumulated over his years at McMurdo. You ever hear of Project Cold Light? He asked. I shook my head. Experimental research program in the mid-90s. Officially, they were studying atmospheric phenomena. Unofficially, he trailed off, his eyes drifting to the window where snow still pelted the glass. They were looking into something else, something they detected during routine geomagnetic surveys. What kind of something? Anomalies, signal patterns that didn't match known natural phenomena, energy signatures where no energy source should exist. David picked up a pen from his desk and turned it over in his hands. The official records are heavily redacted, but from what I've pieced together, they built specialized equipment to amplify and study these signals. And that's what attracted it? I asked. That's my theory. Think of it like this. If you shine a light into a dark cave, whatever's living in there becomes aware of you. David set the pen down with careful precision. Project Cold Light didn't just shine a light. They broadcast a beacon. I tried to process this. So this presence, it wasn't here before? Oh, it was here, David said. The indigenous people who explored this continent centuries ago had legends about voices in the ice. Early explorers wrote about hearing phantom calls for help during blizzards. It's been here. Cold Light just woke it up, made it more active, more focused on us. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the station's temperature. And you can't get rid of it? Can't shut down whatever woke it up? The Cold Light equipment was dismantled in 1998 after the first disappearance. Didn't matter. By then, it was too late. David rubbed his eyes. We've tried electromagnetic dampening fields, sonic deterrents, even having a chaplain perform blessings on the station. Nothing works. The best we can do is coexist by following the rules. Coexist? I repeated, not bothering to hide my disbelief. People are vanishing. People who break the rules, David countered, his voice sharp. In my 6 years as station head, we've lost 3 people, including Emily. All 3 ignored the protocols we established to keep them safe. And you're okay with that? With writing off Emily as collateral damage? David's face hardened. I'm not okay with any of it. But I'm responsible for everyone at this station, not just the ones who make poor choices. These rules, he nodded toward my pocket where I'd placed the paper, they work. They keep people alive. But the rest of the staff, long-term staff, know what they need to know. David cut me off. Some have experienced it themselves and follow the rules without question. Others have been briefed to various degrees based on their positions and how long they'll be here. And the newer arrivals? People like me? I asked. We watch for signs of sensitivity. Most people go their entire deployment without experiencing anything unusual. Those who do, we bring into the fold, like you. I thought about my first 3 months at the station, completely normal until Emily arrived. So why now? Why did I start hearing things only after she got here? David's eyes narrowed slightly. Interesting timing, isn't it? My guess is that you were always sensitive, but her presence somehow amplified things. We've noticed clusters of activity before. One incident tends to trigger others. So whatever it is, feeds on attention? I don't know if feeds is the right word, but yes, attention seems to strengthen it. David opened a drawer and pulled out a worn notebook. That's part of Rule 7. No discussing experiences outside the station. The more people know, the more power it seems to gain. I ran my fingers over the paper in my pocket. How many people at the station right now know about this? 7, including you. 5 long-term staff who've been through multiple winters, plus Dr. Chen, who experienced something 3 weeks ago. Karen knows? I asked, thinking of how calmly she'd led our search for Emily. David nodded. Had her own encounter last month. Heard her mother's voice outside her window. Unlike Emily, she followed the rules. A question had been bothering me since Emily's disappearance. What happens to them? The people who disappear? David's face remained impassive, but I caught a flicker of something in his eyes, a moment of genuine pain quickly suppressed. That's precisely the kind of thinking that gets people in trouble, Mitchell. Wondering what happened to them leads to investigating, which leads to breaking rules. You must have theories. What I have, David said slowly, is the responsibility to keep the remaining staff alive until spring. That means following protocols that work, not speculating about things we can't change. But Emily made a critical mistake, David continued, cutting me off again. She thought she could help whatever was calling to her. She thought if she just responded, just went outside, she could save her sister or understand what was happening. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. It wasn't her sister, Mitchell. The voices, the figures people sometimes see, they're not what they appear to be. Then what are they? I don't know, but I know what they want. Which is to get inside. David's voice was flat, matter of fact, or to get you outside. Either way, the outcome is the same. We sat in silence for a moment as the wind howled against the building. Eventually, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since finding Emily's footprints ending in nothing. Is there any chance she's still alive? David's expression softened almost imperceptibly. In the 24 years since this started, no one who's disappeared has ever come back. I nodded, the finality of his words settling like a weight on my chest. So I just, what? Pretend nothing happened? Go back to work tomorrow like normal? That's exactly what you do. You follow the rules. You complete your contract. You survive until October when the first planes arrive. David stood up, signaling that our conversation was ending. And when you leave, you never speak of this to anyone. Ever. I got to my feet, feeling oddly disconnected from my body, like I was watching myself from a distance. 7 more months, I said quietly. 7 more months, David confirmed. Keep that paper with you. Read it every night. The rules are your lifeline, Mitchell. Follow them without question. It's your only chance of making it to October.